The teapot is both the crowning glory for potters and probably the biggest pain that they deal with. The reason for that is because there's so many parts to a teapot, there's so many ways you can design it, and there's so many ways it can go bad on you. The one that I do make when I make them, which sometimes for years I'll go without making them. After all, tea isn't like the biggest thing in America, at least in terms of fashionable pottery. Okay, anyway, I'm going to show you how I make my teapot, and maybe try to tell you the reasons as well. Okay, I'm starting by making a split form, which is no different from a canister, really, except for I'm going to belly it out more. A nice round form for a teapot holds a lot of liquid without being too tippy. So I'm going to give it the sill on the top for putting a lid on it, and smooth it off with a rib. Shaping it as well with the rib. And that pot is not particularly hard to make, that part of it. Make a point of measuring the width of the lid for later, get the water out of it, trim the bottom off, and the basic part of the teapot is done. This is my one-piece lid. I've left a little bit extra big knob on it to make it easy to get on and off, although when you do that you got to think, is it going to fit on the whole teapot as a whole? So I'm going to cut some of the extra off to make it a little more delicate appearing. And when I've got the knob shaped the way that I want it and the teapot lid the size that I want it, it's just a matter of smoothing it off and setting it aside to harden up to leather hard. Now here I'm doing a little pre-measuring. I knew it was too large, and I want it to be a little bit large so that I can trim it to exactly the right size, or because it's a lot easier to make it smaller than bigger again. At any rate, I did trim off a little bit there by cutting down with a needle tool. Now this is my own innovation for the spout, and spouts can be made from very skinny little tubes. The problem most potters have with spouts is that if you shape it at all, that during the firing it tends to kind of unwind a little bit and will end up pointing the wrong way. And I figured out that just by making a simple bowl shape I could make a spout that doesn't have that problem. I'm sure other potters have figured this out sometimes too. It makes an interesting shape for the spout. Anyway, you make a simple bowl shape, regular bowl, and then just cut the thing in half. You get two spouts out of it. Now watch closely as the parts that were cut get folded over each other to make that spout shape. There's a nice overlapping piece which I always leave as decorative as well as just a functional joint, making sure that the clay is wet enough and compressed enough to make a good seal. There I'm working the end of it a little bit, just giving it a little bit more of a pouring lip by running a finger through it a couple of times and making sure there's a bit of a tip sticking down for that last drop that can be the real hassle of making a spout. Here I just made a couple of spouts in a row to show you how easy and quick you can make these things and how they come out looking pretty spout-like. Okay, it's trimming time again, and I ought to know that anything that's that tall is not going to just stay in place on a dry bat without a little bit of clay pat. So here I am adding them, and I'm going to do some of the traditional trimming off with the loop tool there. I just leave a flat bottom on my teapots, and could add a foot to it or carve in a foot, but it just seems fine with a flat bottom, so why mess with it, I say. So when you've got the basic teapot cleaned up, you've got to make the lid fit. And turns out the lid was too big. As I said, I like to leave it that way. We're going to have to do a little bit of trimming on it. Measure again with the calipers and compare again with the lid. It's wonderful the way calipers will fit around a knob like that. Now I'm cutting down with the needle tool, cutting off a little bit of it and getting rid of that excess. And while it's centered there and everything, you can sometimes just smooth off those edges in case it, by some great fortune, fits. I had a feeling it wouldn't because I tried to trim a little extra big to begin with. So now I know exactly how much more to take off, hopefully. And I'm going to take another little ring off with the needle tool. This can also be done with the loop tools. The needle tool is quicker to take off a large quantity or the amount that you want, hopefully. Then I smooth it off a little bit with my fingers and fit it into the teapot. Make sure it's got a little bit of wiggle room in it, and that takes care of that. Okay, it's time to add the spout now. The spout has been hardening up just like everything else. You don't want it to be too hard. You can trim away a little extra clay if there's some inside. And also, if you just stick the spout on the way that it is, it's going to stick straight out the side of the pot, which is the way I made my first spout on a teapot. But hopefully you won't do that more than once. You want the spout to tip up some so that the top of the spout is as high as the top of the pot, so you don't spill out unnecessary liquid. Now I dipped it in some water there to help me mark the place where the spout's going to go. There I am saying you got to have that spout tall enough. And when you stick it on and then pull it off again, you're going to have a little mark left with the water showing where the spout's going to go. Now using a hole punching tool, I make some holes for kind of a strainer there. It doesn't keep out fine tea leaves, but it's a nice way of keeping the integrity of the teapot and adding a bit of straining capacity to it as well. So I try to fit in as many holes as I can within that space defined by the teapot spout. Now add some slip on to that spout and get it so that it's ready to attach on. Push it on with some good force. I may need to take the spout off and have a hand inside in order to apply pressure both ways at once. If there's some little gaps, you may need to fill in a bit with some clay, and in fact you can make a nice smooth transition by adding a coil of clay all the way around it. And this would be less necessary if the spout wasn't quite so hard. The spout had hardened up quite a bit, and if it was a soft leather hard, you'd be able to kind of blend it in better to the body of the teapot. But here I am adding a coil of clay around the outside of it. You especially want to watch for any place in the bottom. You wouldn't want any leaks to come out down there. Okay, so the coil goes around, the finger smooths it off. There's some slip there to make it all nice and slippery while you're working with it. And the spout gets attached that way. When you make a spout out of a bowl, the place where the bowl connects to the bat leaves a kind of a line there on the spout, and I kind of like that as a stylistic remnant of what went into making that kind of a spout. Once you have the body of the teapot done, you have the handle to consider, and as I make the handle here, I want to talk a little bit about handles and how they work. If you put the handle on the back, it looks nice, but it puts all the weight to the front of the teapot and can make it a little awkward to hold. So a lot of teapots end up with the handle over the top, which is the way this one will be made. I used to make my own rattan handles or cane handles with little lugs on them, but it's a lot of work, and since pottery is what I work with the best, I stick with clay handles nowadays. Now you can see I've cut it off to about the length that I want, putting some slip on the end, And I'm attaching the big part towards the back, which is just my choice. You could make it all about the same thickness, but I like the variety that you get from changing it. Doing a little scoring at each end. And I like the handle to go back a little bit because of the way that the lid is going to come off. It's going to come off towards the back, which you'll see in a little bit, the reason for that. So once you've got it stuck on, you want to make sure it's straight up and down, and you can actually use the knob as a part of, and the spout of course, to line up the handle to make sure it fits well. And as always, remember that even though a round handle looks the best, if it's slightly flattened, it's better to hold on to. Although in a bigger handle, it doesn't matter so much. Okay, here I am. I rolled out a little bit of clay and rounded the ends. I'm cutting it in half, making two little lugs, which I flattened out a little bit, put on some slip, and I'm going to stick them at about, if it were a clock face, it'd be about 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock on the teapot. And then I'm bending them over a little bit. If you bend them too much, they're going to contact the lid, and you don't want to do that. So the point of making these little ears is just a little thing to hold the lid on, which when you have an overhead handle you can actually hold it on manually, but it's nice to have kind of a fail-safe, and it's an interesting little feature to this teapot.